My name is Lauren Davis, and last Tuesday, my entire life changed in a way I still haven't fully processed. But before I tell you about that, you need to understand where I came from, the life I lived before everything shifted with the twist of fate I never saw coming. At 35, I was living what most would consider an unremarkable life. I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized marketing firm in Seattle. My days were long and exhausting. 60-hour weeks were standard, especially during tax season. My boss had a knack for taking credit for my ideas, while my co-workers had perfected the art of slacking off just enough to dump extra work on me without getting caught. Despite my dedication, recognition was scarce, and promotions always seemed to go to someone louder, flashier, or better connected. Financially, things were always tight. I wasn't drowning, but I wasn't floating comfortably either. My paycheck covered rent on my small one-bedroom apartment and kept the lights on, but there was never much left over. Between lingering student loans, a stubborn balance on my credit card, and the unpredictable costs of an aging car, I was constantly juggling bills like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Every month, I carefully mapped out my budget, cutting corners wherever possible. My one indulgence was buying a lottery ticket each Friday, $10 a week for the tiny spark of hope it gave me. My family teased me relentlessly for it. "Lauren, it's just a tax on poor people," my mother, Margaret, would say with a sigh. My father, Edward, liked to rattle off statistics about probability and chance, trying to convince me to save the money instead. Even my brother Ethan joked, "Just give me the $10. At least you'll see some benefit when I spend it." But to me, those tickets were more than a game. They were a lifeline to possibility, a fantasy of a future where I wasn't constantly counting pennies or saying no to every opportunity because it wasn't practical. Family life was complicated. My parents had divorced when I was 15, both remarried quickly, creating two separate households filled with unspoken tension. Margaret, my mother, married Franklin, a frugal business owner who treated every dollar like it was his last. Edward, my father, married Clara, who thrived on luxury and never missed a chance to show it off. My siblings and I were scattered across these families. Ethan, my older brother at 38, was charming and funny, but hopelessly unreliable. He floated between jobs, relationships, and bad decisions, leaving a trail of unfinished commitments behind him. Samantha, my younger sister at 32, had done everything right. She married Evan, a corporate lawyer, and lived in a pristine suburban home with their two picture-perfect kids. Extended family brought its own mix of personalities. Aunt Ruth, my mum's sister, was a retired librarian living modestly. She didn't have much, but she was endlessly kind and supportive. Uncle Patrick, my dad's older brother, was wealthy and smug, the type to mask insults as advice. His son Blake had inherited the entitlement without the success. Blake's gambling problem was an open secret everyone pretended didn't exist. Over the years, my role had become painfully clear. I was the reliable one, the family safety net. When Ethan needed money for rehab, I drained my savings to cover it, only to discover later he'd never even checked in. When Samantha wanted a bigger wedding than she and Evan could afford, I put $2,000 on my credit card to help out. 5 years later, she still hadn't repaid me. Even my dad had once called, desperate for help fixing his leaky roof. A month after I sent him money, I saw photos of him and Clara sipping cocktails on a Caribbean beach. Despite all of this, I never said no. I was the one they called in a crisis, the one who showed up, even when it hurt. As I sat in my cramped apartment that evening, balancing my checkbook by the soft glow of a cheap desk lamp, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just my lot in life, a cycle of giving until there was nothing left. I had no idea how drastically that was about to change. My 35th birthday came and went without much fanfare. I'd never been one for big celebrations, and this year, after an especially grueling week at work, I didn't have the energy for anything elaborate. Earlier that day, my boss, Gerald, had taken credit for a financial strategy I'd spent weeks perfecting. As usual, he presented it to the partners as if it were his own genius idea. And as usual, I'd smiled tightly and swallowed my anger. By the time I left the office, my head was pounding and my shoulders ached from hours hunched over spreadsheets. On my way home, I stopped by Patel's Market, a small corner store I'd been going to for years. Mr. Patel, the owner, greeted me with his usual warm smile from behind the counter. "Ah, Miss Davis, happy birthday today, yes?" he said, his eyes twinkling. I blinked in surprise. "You remembered? Of course. You are one of my best customers." He chuckled, then added, "Maybe tonight will be your lucky night, I laughed softly and handed him a $20 bill. "Let's hope so. Give me my usual $10 worth and maybe a few extra for good luck." Normally I let the machine pick random numbers, but on a whim, I decided to choose my own numbers this time, each one representing someone important in my life. My birth month and day, Aunt Ruth's birthday, Mia's birthday, Samantha's, even Ethan's, despite everything. As Mr. Patel handed me the tickets, he winked. "Go home, relax, and win big." That night, I treated myself to Thai takeout and a glass of wine. I sat on my worn couch, scrolling through social media, seeing friends out celebrating their lives while mine felt stuck. The lottery drawing aired at 8 o'clock, but I didn't watch it live. At 8:30, almost as an afterthought, I picked up my phone to check the numbers. The first matched, then the second. My heart began to race. Third number, match, fourth match. By the fifth, my hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The sixth and final number, match. I froze, staring at the screen. This couldn't be real. I scrambled to the TV, rewound the live drawing, and watched in stunned silence as the announcer read each number, my numbers, one by one. According to the lottery website, I was the sole winner of a $50 million jackpot. After taxes, it would be roughly $30 million, an amount so staggering it barely felt real. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, clutching the ticket like it might vanish. Joy surged through me, quickly followed by sheer panic. I spent the entire night glued to my laptop, reading stories about past winners. The tales were terrifying. Families torn apart by greed, friendships destroyed, people bankrupted within 5 years. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would tell no one, not my family, not even Mia, my closest friend. For now, this life-altering secret was mine alone. The next morning, I didn't go to work. For the first time in years, I called in sick. My voice shook as I left the message, though it had nothing to do with a cold or flu. After a sleepless night spent staring at my winning ticket and frantically Googling what to do when you win the lottery, one thing became clear. I couldn't handle this alone. If I wasn't careful, $30 million could disappear as quickly as it had arrived. That afternoon, I found myself riding an elevator to the top floor of a sleek downtown office building. My stomach churned as the doors opened, revealing a polished lobby with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. The plaque on the wall read, "Vaughan and Associates, Estate and Financial Law." A receptionist greeted me warmly and led me to a private office where Richard Vaughan, the firm's founder, waited. He looked to be in his late 50s, with silver hair, a calm demeanour, and the kind of quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Ms. Davis," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Please, have a seat. What can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath, reached into my purse, and slid the folded lottery ticket across his desk. "This," I said simply. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't react the way I expected. No wide-eyed excitement, no gasp of shock, just a measured nod, as though clients brought him winning tickets every day. "I see," he said smoothly. "Congratulations. Now let's talk about how to protect you." Over the next hour, he laid out a plan. I could claim the winnings through a blind trust, which would keep my name and address out of the public record. He emphasized the importance of creating a secure investment portfolio, setting aside funds for taxes, and building safeguards to prevent anyone from accessing the money without my consent. Then he leaned forward, his expression serious. "The biggest mistake lottery winners make," he warned, "is sharing the news too soon. Once the word is out, you can't take it back." When I left his office, a thick folder of documents clutched to my chest, the world felt surreal. To everyone else, I was still just Lauren Davis, the overworked, underpaid accountant. But beneath the surface, my life had changed forever. The following 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and quiet disbelief. Richard guided me through every step of securing the money. Together, we set up the blind trust, opened carefully protected accounts, and created a financial plan that would keep me safe for the rest of my life. On the outside, nothing had changed. I still drove my beat-up Corolla to work, still clocked long hours at the marketing firm, and still balanced my budget down to the last cent. To the world, including my family, I was the same old Lauren, struggling but dependable. But inside, the secret gnawed at me. There were moments when the weight of it became almost unbearable. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry, to tell someone. There were so many things I could do now, so many dreams I could finally chase. And yet, I stayed silent. Each time I felt tempted to pick up the phone and tell my mother or Samantha or even Ethan, I remembered every betrayal. The way Samantha had promised to repay me for her wedding loan and then conveniently forgotten. Ethan's tearful vow to get clean, followed by his disappearing act once I'd paid for his rehab. My father smiling in vacation photos while I was still paying off the emergency house repair he'd begged me to fund. The memories hardened my resolve. Then one night, as I sat alone on my couch, a thought crept into my mind. What if they thought I was the one who needed help? Would they step up for me the way I had always stepped up for them? Would they care about me or just what I could give them? The idea grew until it felt like the only way to truly know who I could trust. The next evening, I shared it with Mia, my best friend since college. We met at a cozy cafe, and I explained my plan over cups of steaming coffee. Mia frowned as I spoke. "Lauren, this feels manipulative. You're basically setting them up to fail." "Maybe," I admitted, twisting my spoon nervously. "But I need to know who really cares before I let them into this new life." I can't afford to be wrong about this. In the days that followed, I crafted a story so detailed it felt real. My company had supposedly shut down overnight after a massive fraud scandal. I'd lost my job, my last paycheck, everything. Now I needed $5,000 to cover rent and urgent medical bills. Significant enough to matter, but not so outrageous it seemed impossible. It was a test, pure and simple, and soon I would have my answers. Before making a single call, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and a cup of strong coffee. If I was going to do this, I needed to be prepared, not just with my story, but emotionally. I drew a chart and wrote down the names of everyone I planned to approach, along with my predictions for how they'd respond. Mom, Margaret. She'd probably sound concerned at first, but ultimately wouldn't give much, if anything. Franklin would likely be her excuse. Dad, Edward. A lecture on financial responsibility was practically guaranteed. Actual help, not a chance. Samantha. She'd blame her kids' tuition or a new expense. Ethan. He'd either flat out refuse or just ignore me altogether. Clara and Franklin. My stepmom and stepdad were almost certain to say no outright. Uncle Patrick and Cousin Blake. They'd probably mock me or judge my poor choices. Aunt Ruth. The only one I truly believed might step up. Looking at the list made my chest ache. Out of everyone in my family, I trusted just one person to come through for me. That night, Mia came over to help me rehearse. I practiced my lines until the story felt natural. The company went under because of fraud, I explained, pacing my living room. I've been applying everywhere, but the job market is tough. And now I need $5,000 to cover rent and some medical bills. Mia crossed her arms, clearly uneasy. You sound convincing. But Lauren, you need to be ready for heartbreak. This could hurt more than you think. I nodded, swallowing hard. I know, but I need to see the truth. The next evening I made my first call, to Mom. My hands trembled as the phone rang. Lauren, you sound upset. What's wrong? She asked immediately. I launched into my story, painting the picture of sudden job loss and mounting bills. At first she gasped and murmured sympathy, but as soon as I mentioned needing help, her tone shifted. Oh, honey, Franklin and I just put a down payment on a lake house. Things are tight right now. Maybe you should try asking your father or Samantha first. I forced a shaky, okay, Mom, but deep down I knew. I'd been right about her. The day after calling Mom, I met my dad for coffee at a quiet cafe near his office. I'd chosen a public place, hoping it might keep the conversation civil. You look tired, Dad said as I sat down, his tone more observational than concerned. I forced a weak smile. It's been a rough couple of weeks. I told him the story, how the company shut down suddenly because of fraud, how my last paycheck never came through, and how I'd been scrambling to stay afloat. When I mentioned needing $5,000, his eyebrows lifted, but not in sympathy. Lauren, he began, slipping into his old teacher voice, this is exactly why I've always told you to have a 6-month emergency fund. If you'd been budgeting properly, you wouldn't be in this mess. For 20 minutes I sat there while he lectured me about financial planning, living below my means, and the dangers of relying on others. I nodded at the right moments, biting back angry retorts. When he finally finished, I asked quietly, So, can you help me, Dad? He shook his head, utterly unbothered. Stephanie and I are focused on our retirement. It wouldn't be financially responsible to dip into our savings. This will be a good learning experience for you, learning experience. My stomach twisted at the words. Samantha greeted me warmly when I showed up at her pristine suburban home 2 days later. Oh my gosh, Lauren, she said, hugging me tightly. I can't believe this happened. You poor thing. For a moment I allowed myself to hope. But when I mentioned the $5,000, her expression shifted. Wow, that's a tough amount right now. We just bought the new SUV and the kitchen renovation's in full swing. She gave me an apologetic smile. Paul handles our finances, and he's very strict about the budget. I nodded, trying not to let my disappointment show. But listen, she added quickly, you could always stay here for a while. The guest room is full of storage, but we could clear it out. It'd be cozy. It was a kind offer, but not what I'd asked for. I left with a hollow ache in my chest. My brother Ethan didn't even pick up the phone. I sent him a long, detailed text explaining my situation. Hours later, his reply was short and cold. Sorry, sis, tight right now. After that, nothing. My calls went straight to voicemail. My follow-up texts were ignored. This from the same brother I'd bailed out for rent, rehab, and countless emergencies over the years. When I called Clara, my stepmom, her tone was clipped and cool. Lauren, I understand you're having trouble, but Franklin and I aren't in a position to help. Perhaps you need to learn better money management skills. I reminded her of the time I'd helped with repairs on their vacation cabin. That was different, she said sharply. It's a family property that benefits everyone. I'd been there once in 5 years. Later, when I reached out to Franklin, his response was even harsher. You're not my child, he said flatly. Your problems aren't my responsibility. Uncle Patrick didn't bother hiding his disdain. Well, Lauren, I always said that marketing firm of yours seemed shaky. If you'd taken that job at the bank like I suggested, you wouldn't be in this situation. By that evening, I heard from Samantha that Patrick was already telling other relatives about my supposed financial irresponsibility. Cousin Blake initially seemed willing to help. He even suggested meeting for lunch to give me a check, but the day of our meeting, he texted an hour before, "Something came up. Let's reschedule." That became the pattern, delay after delay until he stopped responding entirely. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Ruth. "Lauren, sweetheart, I just heard about your job. Are you okay?" Her voice was full of genuine concern. I hadn't even called her yet. She'd heard secondhand and reached out immediately. When we met for lunch the next day, she hugged me tight before sitting down. After we ate, she pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "It's $3,000, she said softly. "I know it's not the full amount, but it should help with rent at least." Tears stung my eyes. "Ruth, I can't take this." "Family helps family," she interrupted. "And if you need a place to stay, my couch pulls out into a bed. It's yours as long as you need it." Unlike everyone else, she didn't ask for anything in return. Her love was pure, unconditional, and real. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope Aunt Ruth had given me. $3,000, nearly all she had, I suspected. The others had excuses, blame, or silence. Ruth, who had the least to give, had given almost everything. Guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking about her kind, tired eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the envelope toward me. She hadn't hesitated, not for a second. The next day, I did a little digging. What I found broke my heart. Ruth's health was worse than she'd let on. Her diabetes medication costs had skyrocketed, and she'd been picking up tutoring sessions on evenings and weekends just to afford it. Her small retirement fund was nearly gone. She was barely scraping by, and yet she'd offered me almost everything she had. Tears burned my eyes. This couldn't continue. She deserved the truth. That evening, I invited Ruth over for tea. As she settled onto my worn couch, she gave me a warm smile. "It's so nice to see you, Lauren. You look better today. Did you get any good news about job interviews?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Ruth, I haven't been honest with you." Her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean, honey?" "I didn't lose my job," I confessed, my voice shaking. "The story about the company shutting down, it wasn't real. I made it up to test the family." Ruth blinked, clearly surprised, but she didn't speak, giving me space to continue. "And there's more." I clasped her hands tightly. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery, $50 million. You're the first person I've told. Ruth sat back, stunned. After a long moment, she sighed softly. "Oh, Lauren, I'm not angry, just sad you felt so alone that you had to test people this way." Then her eyes grew distant. "I understand, though. When I was younger, my ex-husband took the inheritance my grandmother left me and gambled it away. I learned then that money doesn't just change people, it reveals them." Her words cut deep, a reflection of everything I'd just witnessed. And in that moment, I knew Ruth was the one person I could always trust. By the end of the week, my plan was clear. I wasn't going to let my family's silence and excuses slide by without acknowledgement. They needed to know that I'd seen them for who they truly were, even if they never knew the whole story. I sent out a group text, inviting everyone to a family meeting at my apartment that Sunday. "I have an important announcement to share. Please come." To my surprise, every single one of them showed up. My parents and their spouses, Samantha and Paul, even Ethan, who had been ghosting me for weeks. Uncle Patrick arrived looking annoyed, while Blake scrolled on his phone like he'd been dragged there against his will. Aunt Ruth came last, giving me a small, knowing smile that calmed my nerves. My tiny living room was packed, and the tension was palpable. I stood at the front, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I know there's been a lot of talk lately about my financial situation, so I wanted to clear the air." My mother leaned forward eagerly. "Did you find a job, honey?" "Yes," I said. In fact, I've found a new position, one with better pay and benefits than my old job. Starting next month, I'll be transitioning into non-profit work. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Some even smiled, clearly happy the uncomfortable topic of me needing help might finally be over. "So why the dramatic meeting?" my father asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Why all the calls asking for money?" I met his gaze evenly. Because I needed to see who would stand by me when things got tough. I wanted to know who would help me, even when there was nothing in it for them. An uneasy silence fell. Then the excuses began. "We have our own expenses," Samantha said quickly. "You know how much private school costs." Franklin crossed his arms. "I've always been honest that you're not my responsibility." Clara sniffed. "Maybe if you managed your finances better." "Enough," I cut in sharply. The room went still. I'm not here to shame anyone. But I am done being the family safety net. For years, I've been there every time you needed something. When I needed you, most of you vanished. Some faces reddened with guilt, others hardened with defensiveness. No one admitted wrongdoing. "I'm not asking for apologies," I continued, "but moving forward, I won't be bailing anyone out. If that changes our relationship, so be it. I didn't mention the lottery win. That was my secret to keep." As they left, murmuring amongst themselves, Aunt Ruth stayed behind. She squeezed my hand. "You did well," she said softly. For the first time, I felt free. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had the night I sat alone in my cramped apartment, clutching that winning lottery ticket. I now lived in a beautiful but modest home on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, no marble fountains or luxury cars, but it was mine. A cozy garden filled the backyard, a place where I spent my mornings sipping coffee in peace. Just a few blocks away, Aunt Ruth lived in the house I'd secretly bought for her. It was perfect for her needs. Single story, with wide doorways to accommodate her walker on difficult days. She had no idea I'd set up a trust fund to cover her medical expenses and living costs. She only knew that some anonymous donor had given her a comfortable retirement. Watching her thrive without the stress of bills was one of my greatest joys. My biggest project, though, was the non-profit organization I'd founded, inspired by Ruth's quiet resilience and the loneliness I'd seen in so many older adults. Our mission was simple but powerful, to help elderly people living alone, especially those estranged from their families. We provided companionship, small home repairs, and financial assistance for basic needs. In just 1 year, we'd helped over 100 seniors, giving them dignity and community. Mia had joined the team as our outreach coordinator, bringing her compassion and boundless energy. She was the only person besides Ruth who knew the full truth about my lottery win. Together, we built something meaningful from what had once been just a wild dream. As for my family, I kept my distance. Our relationships were cordial but surface level, birthday calls, holiday gatherings, nothing more. They never knew about my wealth, and I preferred it that way. When crises arose, I sometimes helped anonymously. When Dad had a minor heart attack, I paid his hospital bills through the Patient Assistance Fund. When Blake finally entered rehab, an anonymous donation covered his treatment. They never suspected it was me, and I never told them. I'd stopped needing their gratitude or their approval. For the first time in my life, I was free to give without being taken for granted. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting warm orange light across Aunt Ruth's porch. We sat side by side in comfortable silence, sipping tea as the evening breeze rustled the leaves of the garden she now tended with joy instead of worry. "It's hard to believe how much has changed in a year," I said softly. Ruth smiled, her hands folded in her lap. "It really is. Sometimes I think about how differently things might have turned out if you'd announced your lottery win right away." I let out a breath, imagining that alternate version of my life. "They would have swarmed me, Ruth." Suddenly, everyone would have been caring and attentive, offering help, checking in, but none of it would have been real. She nodded, her gaze steady. Exactly. Money doesn't change people, Lauren. It just shows who they really are. Her words sank deep into my heart. She was right. The experiment had been painful, but it had given me something priceless: clarity. I no longer wondered who truly loved me and who only saw me as a resource. Looking out at the sunset, I felt a peace I'd never known before. My days of being manipulated, drained, and taken for granted were over. My wealth had given me freedom, not just financial freedom, but freedom from the toxic expectations I'd carried for so long. I turned to Ruth and smiled. The money's been a blessing, but it's not the most valuable thing I've gained. She tilted her head. Oh, what is? Knowing who my real family is, I said simply, and finally understanding that my worth isn't measured by what I can give, but by who I am. Now, I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever wondered who would stand by you if you had nothing left to offer but yourself? Think about that carefully. The people who deserve a place in your life aren't the ones who show up when you have everything to give. They're the ones who stay when you have nothing at all.